Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Philippine Geographical Society Lecture Series 2021. The PGS-LS is a project collaboration between the Philippine Geographical Society and the UP Diliman Department of Geography. This is the 10th session of the online talks we are conducting this year. Our lecture for today is co-sponsored by the UP Department of Geography, the Wild Bird Club of the Philippines, the UP Wild and UP Haring Ibon. I am Dominica Marsolo and I will be the moderator for this event. Before we proceed, let me remind everyone about some house rules we need to observe. First, during the speaker's presentation, all attendees will be on mute. We are encouraging everyone to interact with the speaker by typing your comments and questions in the Zoom chat box. These questions will be addressed during the open forum session. Please note that this lecture is simultaneously streamed in the UP Department of Geography YouTube channel. Those who we cannot accommodate in Zoom can watch the session in YouTube. This session is being recorded and will be made available for viewing after the event. Lastly, just to give everyone a heads up, we will be taking a group photo before we end the lecture. Please be ready to turn on your video for that part of the program. To begin our session, I would like to call the President of the Philippine Geographical Society, Professor Emmanuel Garcia, for the opening remarks.
Magandang hapon. Thank you, Doms. Magandang hapon po sa ating lahat. Welcome once again to another episode of the Philippine Geographical Society Lecture Series 2021. On behalf of the Philippine Geographical Society and the UP Department of Geography, I am delighted to welcome everyone in this afternoon's lecture. This is the 10th lecture that we are having this year, which is part of our objectives to promote geography amidst the pandemic and while we are still unable to hold our actual National Conference on Geographical Studies, or NCGS. Through this, we hope to highlight the different geographic researches that are being done by our fellow geographers and allies in the field. For this afternoon, our invited speaker will talk and share various mapping geo-visualizations of birds in the Philippines and in Southeast Asia, with a special focus on bird conservation efforts and initiatives. This lecture also touches on the identification and delineation of protected areas. I am happy to say that this lecture generated the most number of pre-registrants. So far, about 300 plus registered for this event. And as what we normally do with our lecture series, we did a word cloud of the keywords derived from the online registration. In this lecture, the dominant words entries are vital, life, biodiversity, protection, and preservation. Other interesting words include coexisting, sustainability, fascinating, responsibility, fantastic, and amazing. And these really are amazing and altogether make a good mix of what we hope could be covered in this afternoon's talk. So on this note, I again would like to thank everyone for joining us today. And as always, I hope we have a very special and productive afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Garcia, for the warm welcome. And with that, I'm very pleased to introduce our speaker for this lecture. Jonathan, or John Villasper, is a bird watcher, founder, and a permanent executive committee member of the Wild Bird Club of the Philippines. He is also a geographer and a former instructor of digital cartography at the UP Department of Geography, where he taught Geographic Information Systems, or GIS, and cartography for several years in both the undergraduate and graduate levels. He has used his skills and knowledge on geography, data, and cartography in a variety of fields, including urban planning, transportation, reproductive health, conflict and development, education, history, and for the longest time, in biodiversity conservation. He had the opportunity to work on, among other things, the book Threatened Birds of the Philippines, an exhaustive resource listing that discusses Philippine birds that are in danger of disappearing from the country, their distribution, ecology, and threats. He also served as member, president, and advisor of the UP Haring Ipon. He has illustrated various Philippine birds, and he continues to be active in several bird mapping undertakings in the country. Recently, he was featured online for his street art maps and creative map designs that involve walking and navigating his neighborhoods armed with the app Google Fit. Everyone, please give a warm welcome to Mr. John Villasper.
Hi, my turn, ano? Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Yes, so let's get on with the lecture. Okay, so for today, hold on. Tayo yata. Sorry. You know, okay, can you see my screen?
Hindi pa.
Wala. Let me repeat that. Naglolo ko.
Or you can send your, kami na lang
No, it's
siguro.
okay. Na ano lang, sumasabit lang siya. Let's try again. Sorry. Kanina lang gumagana eh. Okay, let's try again. There you go. So we're going to talk about mapping birds for conservation. Okay. All right. All right. Let's start with the discussion. So one day, I had this discussion on FB in one of our bird watching groups. So here it is now. Random thoughts on the rainy morning. I know I'm a birder or a bird watcher, but I hate or I don't like. And then sagot niya is geography and botany. So natawa lang ako nun, no, na the person hates geography when she's a bird watcher. And then the reason for that comment is she realized that geography is a very much important part of bird watching. Geography dictates has a geography has a big role in identifying birds. Actually, some birds will be very similar, pero ang ano lang niya, the way to differentiate them is geography. Pag nasa Luzon, ganitong species siya. Pag nasa Mindanao, ganitong species siya. But not all the time. Anyway, so let's just move on. So I'm sure you would wonder why birds. So why birds? Number one, it's interesting. I'm sure a lot of you have been fascinated by birds, no? Probably when you were a kid and even up to now. So yes, they are very interesting. They are easily observable. Madaling makita, unlike say for example maybe insects or reptiles. Mahirap yun, no? They can also indicate the presence of suitable food source and shelter. So if you see a bird, if there's a bird living in an area, that means it has it has a food source and it has shelter. So aside from that, may ano pa yan, may iba pa mga susunod doon, ano? And then given that it can indicate the presence of suitable food source and shelter, it is an excellent indicator of the condition of the environment. The mere presence of an apex predator, say for example an eagle, or let's use the Philippine eagle for example. The mere fact that there's a Philippine eagle in an area, it indicates the presence of other organisms such as small mammals, reptiles, amphibians, things that the eagle can eat, other birds. And aside from that, that means if you have insects, you probably have plants or plants that flower or bear fruit. And say, tapos sunod-sunod na yan, no? There will be animals that would eat amphibians. There will be other birds that eat insects, reptiles, etc., etc. So it's a whole ecosystem being a whole healthy ecosystem that's being indicated by the presence of an apex predator, or we can probably say an umbrella species. Anyway, so let's talk about some more about Philippine birds. Just the numbers, no? So we're probably familiar with a few Philippine birds. You have the Philippine eagle. You probably know about the cockatoo. You probably know about just a few others. I had a class before who surveyed students from UP, asking them to name 10 birds. And by number 5, nahirapan na silang mag-identify ng mga birds. And some of them actually used identified birds that are not in the Philippines. And also number 6, the bat came up at number 6. Na alam naman natin ang bat ay hindi bird. So we don't know much about Philippine birds, the general public. So let's talk about Philippine birds. So how many are there in the Philippines? There are 714 species of birds in the Philippines, and what you see right now is just a subset. 242 endemic species. These are species that you can only find in the Philippines and nowhere else. Balikan lang natin yan. Let's just go back. So 242 species endemic. Some of them will be endemic to the Philippines as the country. Some of them will be endemic to a specific island. Some of them will be endemic to just a specific mountain. Ganun siyang katindi. And then we have resident species at 452. Ito yung mga nakatira talaga dito. Or yeah, you will see them full year round. And then 110 migrant species. So you will see them in the Philippines during the migration season. Tapos mawawala uli sila. And then threatened species, you have 95. And out of those 95 endemic species, out of those 95 threatened species, 66 of them are endemics. So ang dami nung natin mga ibon natin na nasa threatened list. These are vulnerable species, critically endangered species, and we're not even counting those which are already extinct or near extinct. So anyway, why map birds? So I'm sure yun tanong. So we map birds to know more about the species, to find gaps in existing knowledge, to aid in the formulation of species conservation management plans, and to aid in the identification and delineation of protected areas. So to know more about the species, let's go there muna. Say for example, let's use the Philippine eagle. Most of us would have the idea that the Philippine eagle can only be found in Mindanao. But if you will see a map of the Philippine eagle, where they are, you will see that they are also found in Luzon, Sierra Madre specifically, and Cordilleras, and then also in Samar and Leyte. To find gaps in existing knowledge, no? Again, let's go back to the Philippine eagle. we have a map. Way back in the 1990s, we came up with the book Threatened Birds of the Philippines. From in that book, we exhausted all the material talking about the Philippine Eagle. So we listed down all the locations where it was found, and then we mapped it. And it came up na yun nga, the Philippine Eagle can be seen in those areas, but there was um, there was a gap in Cordilleras. Walang Philippine Eagle in the Cordilleras. And it's kind of strange because the Cordilleras have very good forests, and yun lang, parang ganun. And there were stories about large eagles. Eventually, after several years, after a decade, I think, the Philippine eagle was discovered in the Cordilleras. Anyway, how are birds usually mapped? So, how ito yung ito yung normal na method of showing where birds are distributed or located. So, in most cases, especially in field guides, you will see generalized distribution maps. So, if a bird can be seen in Luzon, the whole island of Luzon is highlighted or colored. So, ganyan. General lang. Pero it doesn't necessarily mean that the bird can be seen all throughout Luzon. And so, yun, generalize siya. Medyo kulang tayo sa information about that. An improvement on that is the new field guide by Desmond Allen. And the islands are not colored wholly, no. So there will be gaps in the map. So it's like, say for example, here in Mindanao, the highlands or these parts, or not necessarily the highlands, there will be parts that are not highlighted, indicating that those areas are not inhabited by a certain species. Next would be occurrence maps. So for occurrence maps, ito lang yung tinatawag natin in cartography na dot distribution maps or dot maps. So you have locations of the Philippine eagle or whatever bird. In this case, this is the silvery kingfisher. So you have a list of locations, and then they are mapped directly on as is now. Okay, siya. And then you have grid maps. So an area can be divided into a grid, into several cells. And then for each cell, say for example, if a bird can be seen in a specific cell, then it is colored. And this is the example. This example is from Citizen Science Rapidly Delivers Extensive Distribution Data. This is actually an Indonesian project. Madadaanan natin mamaya. We'll talk about this more. So, yan, ganyan, pwede siyang i-present ng ganyan. And then it can also be seen, it can also be shown as a flow map. So, to show migration patterns, ganting ginagawa for static maps. This one is the National Geographic bird migration map. However, pag tinignan mo naman, since you have a lot of birds and you have a lot of migrants and a lot of migration paths going on, the map becomes unintelligible in a way. But you can see where they are, what do you call this, where they are congregating. So makita niyo na napaka-importante ng Central America, for example. And then you have spatiotemporal mapping. So in this case, sparrowhawk, a Japanese sparrowhawk, was fitted with a satellite tracker. and its movement during migration season was recorded daily. So for the month of September 2020 to October, ito yung naging path niya. And using that, you can determine kung saan dumadaan ang karamihan ng mga Japanese sparrowhawks. And when you are able to determine that, marami ka nang pwedeng gawin na conservation measures. In our case, in the Philippines, there are a lot of migrating hawks or migrating raptors, and we don't really know where they are passing through. We only know that they enter Ilocos, and they also enter from Davao, but we don't know where they really are passing when they go through the Philippines. So if we are able to do the same thing, put a tracker on some birds, we can also do this. And then we have species distribution models. These are the more popular or more current undertakings right now. No? So we normally wonder where birds are located or where they are possibly found, no? Or what is their probable range. Hindi pwede yung kaninang na generalized, no? We want to determine where exactly, or we want to have a more nuanced distribution map of a specific bird. So in species distribution models, what you do is take several environmental variables and use them to create a map of to create a map of their potential range. So for this case, this is for the flame-breasted fruit dove. This is a paper presented in 2018 at the National Conference on Geographic Studies. Okay, so how to map birds? Probably that's another question. Huh? So how to map birds? Number one, data is the backbone of mapping. In any mapping undertaking, data is the backbone, and it has to be very good data. It has to be clean data. It has to be reliable data. So where does your data come from? Your data about birds can come from several sources. No? It can come from field surveys by field biologists. It can come from bird watching reports. You can also get them from museum records or specimens, incidental observations, news articles, and local knowledge or local stories. Now, some of these are highlighted in yellow. These yellow entries indicate that they are what we would call citizen science. No? These are normally not done by biologists. These are just hobbyists, bird watcher. Kagaya ko, hindi naman ako biologist. I just like watching birds. So anybody can be a bird watcher. Anybody can contribute to the pool of knowledge in terms of birds. So, eto mga communities, eto sino lang yan. Minsan ako, ganun, naghihintay ka ng jeep, ganun, may nakita kang ibon. That's a source of information. So, nabanggit ko yung citizen science. No? So, citizen science is scientific research conducted in whole or in part by amateur scientists. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're conducting research, but you are actually, the mere fact that you are contributing to the pool of knowledge in science, that makes you a citizen scientist. So, say, for example, you are a bird watcher, you have records, you have observations of birds. So that means you have records. If you pass along those records, that turns you into a citizen scientist. So I just wanted to mention that because it's a very important thing in bird watching or in mapping birds. Again, going back, bird watching reports, incidental observations, and local knowledge and stories. These are all considered as citizen science. So data, no, we're talking about data. An example of data. So your observations in bird watching or in the field get compiled into a table, and for the threatened birds of the Philippines na publication, this is the threatened birds of the Philippines is the red data book of birds in the Philippines. I just want to mention that uh, uh, the International Union for Conservation of Nature publishes what we call a red data book, several red data books now for mammals, for fish, for plants, for birds, reptiles, etc., etc. In this book, the book lists down all the species that are evaluated as threatened, endangered, critically endangered, near extinct, things like that. Now, so when we came up with this book, this is the database that we came up with. So we have a list of the species along with the coordinates where they are found. Now, going back here now. Now for this book now, what we did was we scoured all the material from basically from everything, from field journals, from uh, academic journals, from museum records. It was a painstaking undertaking. Back then, there was no unified database of birds, so you have to gather everything into one repository. It took us around more than a year actually to compile everything. 2 years, 3 years, I guess. I can't remember. So anyway, we came up with this, and it became a book. Nowadays, you have a better resource now. It's what we call Ebird. This is from Cornell Lab of Ornithology. It's a global data set of bird observations. The contributions come from bird watchers or photographers. Anybody who has bird observations can contribute to the database that eBird is maintaining. So and then you can access the data. You can do mapping with the data that they have compiled. So actually, for my thesis, ginagamit ko to. Anyway. Now, in terms of locations, of course, we have to come up with the coordinates for each location that is mentioned in the database for each record. Now, where do we get the location? Nowadays, you have GPS. No, even in your smartphone, you have GPS. That's easy to do. But back then, if for records that were made pre-GI before GPS existed, you have a lot of other resources. So you have maps. You have map gazetteers. It's a list of place names which mentions the coordinates of each one. And then you have GPS readings, online references. You have narratives. Now, narratives would be, how would I say this? Ito yung kwento, no? You use this to estimate where the observation was made. So in this case, no, I was trying to map or I was trying to locate a record of a certain bird in Mindanao. Now, the coordinates were not provided by the explorer. This was done during the Spanish period. So there was nothing to work with except for the fact that he started in their journal. They mentioned that they started from this town, traversed the mountain for 3 days, and got the observation. So I had to do some estimation on where would you be able to get to in 3 days. So ganon. Pero nowadays, again, you have GPS. Now, once you have your data ready, you have compiled it, you have the coordinates for it, it's mapping time. So from your basic table, it becomes a basic map. So these records become this. Yeah. And you use a GIS for mapping, given that there's a lot of data. But you can, of course, if you want to do it manually, you can do it. No problem. Now, from basic map, you can do analysis and further learning. No? For example, this is the Ebird data for the Philippines from 2013 to 2019. I just wanted to show you this. We have 360,000 records from those 6 years, 5,700 localities, and yet you have a large gap in the map. So these are areas that are not visited by bird watchers, by field biologists, and we need data for that. For 2019 alone, this is how it looks like. Basically, half of the records came from 2019. Half of the localities being reported came from 2019. It's good, no? Na in 1 year, nag-double yung records natin, but still you have the gaps, and we need people to fill those gaps. Now, what else can you do? So, yun lang, no? Basic analysis, gap analysis, yeah, you can do that. Now, what else can you do with it? This is from the Wild Bird Club of the Philippines database. 2014, this was presented in 2014 using data from 2007 to 2009. So for Metro Manila, these are the areas where birds were observed. The larger the circle, the more species were seen. So andyan ang UP, makita natin. That is UP. And then the colors would indicate what kind of place it is. If it was built up, if it's green space, or it's undeveloped. So normally we expect the birds to be seen in built-up areas. In green spaces. But if you would notice, there would be a lot of red spaces or red locations, which indicate built-up areas. So that's exploring the data if you have the information for those. Now, and on the analysis side, another thing that you can do is SDMs, or species distribution models, or species distribution maps. No? So, ito yung kanina rin. No? This is species distribution map using MCE, or multi-criteria evaluation. It's basically an overlay technique in mapping. No? So you get elevation and you get vegetation that is associated with the species, and then you intersect them. The resulting intersection will be the potential distribution area, potential distribution or potential range of the species. That's the easiest way to do species distribution mapping. Another way of doing this species distribution mapping is by using Maxent. Now, Maxent is a software, short for maximum entropy. It's a software for developing models, statistical models of for distribution. Normally, it is used for predicting distribution based on in relation to climate change. So it determines the environmental variables that affect distribution the most, and it uses those identified variables to develop the distribution model. This example is not about birds. If you would take a look at the title, this is predicted range of Chanos chanos. And Chanos chanos is not a bird. That's bangus. So we did this for bangus, prediction of bangus at several changes in several changes in sea surface temperature. Uh, I wish I could show you the other maps for this, but I wasn't able to get the others now. But that's another application of mapping used by doing species distribution mapping. Also, you can also do this. An example. This is a good example. This is called Atlas Burung Indonesia. Burung means bird. So it's a bird atlas of Indonesia. So this is the grid mapping that I showed you earlier. What they did here is they divided Indonesia into a grid, and for each cell, they determined whether a specific species can be found in that cell. And what you can do with it is, if the data is compiled now, if you select one cell, say for example, you select this one, you can get all the species that are potentially existing in that area. And then you can also select the species, and then it will give you a distribution map. And then another example, this is data using Ebird by Cornell Labs. If you have a lot of data, tons of data, you can do this. So this is the relative abundance of barn swallows by season or by month. So as the months go by, as the months go by, you will see how the barn swallow moves in the continent. So, yeah, taas baba sila dito, ganon. And then also from basic maps, from basic mapping of birds, you can do your recommendations on conservation and recommendations in relation to development. So going back to the threatened birds of the Philippines, what happened here is that after getting all the records, we were able to determine the threats to each species, and with that came also the management plans. We had some recommendations as to how to prevent their extinction. And then from this book as well came another book, Key Conservation Sites in the Philippines. So compiling everything, compiling all the species and mapping them, you can select areas where there would be more than, say, for example, more than 5 endangered or threatened species. And for those with a high number of threatened species, you can recommend that for conservation. So we had around 80 recommendations for conservation. And again, if you conserve the birds, if you save the birds, you are also saving everybody else in that area. And then you can do what's this? Yun. Key water bird areas in Manila Bay. So there we had this we had a friend who did some surveys on water birds along Manila Bay, and he came up with several areas where migratory birds are congregating, and these have been recommended for development into protected areas. And you would notice etong puti na to. This white polygon here, this is the Bulacan Airport, the one that San Miguel's developing. So now you have an argument against the proposed airport. Anyway, wrapping up, no? I hope may kayo natutunan doon. So mapping is valuable in biodiversity conservation. Database biodiversity conservation should be the norm. Citizen science has an important part in mapping birds, and we need more observers. Now, that is actually a call for people to be involved. No? So if you want to be involved, if you want to be more, if you want to know more about birds, you can join a bird interest group on FB. We have Birdwatch Philippines community, and you can go bird watching with the Wild Bird Club of the Philippines. If you want to check out our website, that would be our website, birdwatch.ph. Yun. So shall we do the Q&A?
Thank you, Sir John, for your wonderful talk. It is very insightful to see how geography and various cartographic techniques and even academic and citizen science can be used in avian biogeography and conservation. We will now proceed with the open forum. So we encourage everyone to type in your questions in the Zoom chat box or in our social media accounts. So in Facebook, Instagram, or in Twitter for those watching in YouTube. So please feel free to add in your comments down at our Zoom chat box.
Pwede po kayo magtanong, hindi ako nangangagat.
Okay, so someone messaged me. Someone messaged me and said, I think, ano muna to, insights lang daw muna. So sabi niya, salamat po sa webinar na ito. Marami po akong insights, realizations, and knowledge na nakuha po mula po rito. Kaugnay po nito ay ito po ang aking mga katanungan. Number 1, ano-ano po ang mga challenges ang na-encounter po ninyo in mapping bird ecology and conservation? So yun po muna. Number 1.
Okay, challenges. Number 1, yung data. Even though we have Ebird, we have more people watching birds. As I mentioned a while ago, kulang pa yon. We still have gaps in observation. So hindi natin magagawa pa yung mga ibang nagagawa ng ibang tao. No? Also, yung quality of data, for example, ano ba to? Yung precision of the location, it's a very tricky issue actually. Kasi if you give out precise location, the problem there is it will become easier for poachers or hunters to go to the same location and get the bird. So that's an issue. Also, when you do highly localized studies, some some information, some location information cannot be used kasi masyadong generalized. So okay lang siya if you're doing countrywide studies or global or regional studies. Pero if you want to do a highly localized study, it's not usable. So yun, what else? Challenges. Wala akong mailalang yung iba. Pero, ayun, excuse, isa pa pala. I mentioned species, yung na-mention ko yung SDM, no? Species Distribution Map. And I also mentioned that mapping should be essential in conservation or in protected area management. Now, however, if you take a look at the case of the Philippines, even though we have a lot of threatened species, it's very seldom, if at all, na merong gumagawa ng species distribution studies. Wala halos. I think naka-encounter lang ako ng mga 1 or 2. So there's a question there. Bakit ganon? Ba't ang konti? Either walang data or nahihirapan ba sila doon sa technique? If we're talking about Maxent, if parang natatakot ba sila doon sa math? Kasi it should not be that difficult to do distribution mapping. Pero kung yun nga, natatakot yung mga tao sa pagiging masyadong technical, then that's a problem. Yeah.
Okay, thank you po. So, next question ay, base po sa findings po na inyo pong nakalap, ano po ang dominant environment na nakita po ninyo na kung saan karamihan po ng ibon ay nag-e-exist?
Normally, you would think na mountains, highlands, and forests, no? Pero it's a misconception dahil yun lang ang naiisip natin. Pagka nagpunta ka sa tabing dagat or sa mud flats, makakita ka ng sangkatutak na ibon. So it's not really fixed to the forest or highlands. You have a lot of birds everywhere. Of course, siyempre sa mga urban areas, medyo mababa ang species count natin and observation count, mababa din. However, if you know what you're looking for, and meaning you are familiar with the birds, you might be surprised to find out that in a typical residential area in Metro Manila, you might find around 7 to 10 species of birds, hindi lang maya. And in my case, ako dito nasa Sampaloc area ako. I'm already on 17 species, I think, or I think 20 na. Hindi lang ako nagbibilang. Pero yun. So even in urban areas, you can find birds. Kaya yung naging study ko nga rin, it was focused on the NCR because I wanted to show people that there are birds in built-up areas, not just in the forest. Yep.
Okay, next question is, how does geography and biology relate to each other in telling stories, spatial patterns, distributions, and concentrations po ng isang organism, gaya po ng birds?
Okay, how does biology and geography relate to each other? There's a thing called biogeography. Geog 213 yon sa dati, sa atin, sa UP. So, like I said a while ago, geography influences diversity of species. So, in our case in the Philippines, for example, we are composed of islands. So, yung evolution ng mga species natin once na ma-isolate sa isang island, over time, it can evolve into a different species. So tumataas ang natin diversity. That's also why you will have some species that you will also have birds, I mean, that look the same but they are considered different species dahil lang sa island, dahil lang magkaiba sila ng location. In fact, we have tailor birds, no. If you see a tailor bird up to Central Luzon, ano siya? Philippine tailor bird siya or grayback tailor bird. Pag umakyat ka pa north, beyond Central Luzon, iba na siya. They look almost the same but iba na yung species. So you will have that kind of delineation. And then in terms of the formation of the Philippines, I'm sure aware yung karamihan sa atin sa sinasabing iba ang flora and fauna sa Palawan. And that's because Palawan came from the Chinese, from the mainland Asia. So nung nag-break off sa mainland Asia, the flora and fauna that was associated with it came with it now. So iba yung mga species na nandun. So you have otters, you have squirrels, gano'n. Ano pa ba? Yan.
Okay, thank you po. Another question is, and comment. Informative session, sir. Would you know of any instance when people actually disturb species that affected their distribution in the long run?
Yes, of course. Definitely meron. For example, meron tayong spot-billed pelican. Tsaka yung sarus crane. So these are two large birds located that you can find in wetlands. Now these two birds, specifically spot-billed pelican, the scientific name is Pelecanus philippensis. The scientific name is named after the Philippines. Took on the name of the Philippines. Isipin niyo lang yun. Now, if you're going to ask me kung nasaan makikita ang spot-billed pelican sa Pilipinas, wala siya. You can find it somewhere else in Southeast Asia, maybe, but not in the Philippines. And ganun din yung sarus crane, you cannot see it in the Philippines anymore. We call that locally extirpated, meaning extinct na siya dito sa location natin. And that happened because of hunting. Marami sila dati, malalaking ibon, hinahunt sila for food and whatever. Hanggang sa naging extinct sila sa atin. So that kind of human activity affects the distribution of those species. On the other hand, of course, meron din tayong yung urban development natin. Not just urban development, expansion, even agricultural expansion natin, or human incursion into the forest or into other habitats. These affect the distribution of wildlife. So, pwedeng dati sa buong bundok makikita mo itong ganitong species, and then ngayon makikita mo na siya sa pinakamataas na areas. Dahil kung saan walang tao pumupunta, doon na sila makikita. Yeah, nasagot ko sa akin.
Okay, our next question is, what conservation or protection activities or projects have you or your organization have done so far? Kindly share. Thank you.
Okay, ano mga nagawa na namin. Number one sa ginagawa namin, no, na yung syempre, since we are a bird watching group, we go bird watching. Now, you might think that hindi siya hindi siya yung something na ginagawa for conservation. But bird watching itself contributes to data, and contributing having data enables people to do conservation work. Like for example, if you remember yung sa Manila Bay, some of the data there came from observations by our members, by our group. Also, yearly meron tinatawag na Asian Waterbird Census. This is a thing that is being conducted during January, I think, all over Asia. Actually, meron ding world weather census din. It's actually global now. Now, in the case of the Philippines, DNR ang in charge, but the problem is the DNR does not have the know-how to identify birds in wetlands. So we came in to help them with the identification and the counting. So every year we go out with the DNR, do the census with them. We teach them how to identify, teach them how to count birds, and then the information that we gather, the data that we gather, gets thrown into a global database or a regional database for conservation. And also another thing, ito mas proud ako dito, no. Yung probably some of you are familiar with La Papachea, or yung wetland protected area sa Parañaque, sa Manila Bay, no. Now that became a protected area because of the Wild Bird Club of the Philippines. We've been going there for bird watching even before it became a protected area. So we were able to record a good number of species and a good count. No? Ang dami namin nakikitang ibon. Now, by virtue of the fact that there were two particular species that we have seen there in large numbers, and because of that, we were able to lobby that it be declared as a protected area. Kasi having paano ba yung sasabihin? At mga migratory birds, no? So migratory birds go up and down the region. We can think of them as owned by the whole world, or owned by Asia. And kung dumadaan sila sa atin at namatay, ang malalagot tayo eh. Isipin niyo ito niya, sabihin natin, you have 5% of the total global population passing through the Philippines at nawala siya bigla dahil namatay sila, hinanting, nawalan ng habitat. If that happens, sino malalagot? Sinong may kasalanan? Pilipinas. So anyway, given na meron ganong karaming ibon, migratory birds, it was quite a considerable percentage of the global population. We were able to lobby for its declaration into protected area. In fact, ang nangyari pa doon, tinrabaho namin yun for one whole day. So, umaga pa lang, tinawagan na ako. Sabi, etong area na to, gagawin gusto natin ma-declare into a protected area. So, we need you to do the math for the area. So, minapa ko siya. Afterwards, pagdating ng tanghali, pinasa ko na sa mga kasama ko from Wild Bird Club of the Philippines, and then ipinasa siya I think sa hindi ko na maalala kanina pinasa, I think sa Congress or whoever or sa Malacanang. And then after a month or so, na-declare siya as protected area. Yun.
Okay, next question po ay ito po muna, comment. Hello sir, thank you po for talking about your methods and different outputs that will be very helpful and useful in ecological related activities. Question, are there any ecological phenomena or processes that result from bird movement? In books and guides, we read of seed dispersal, etc. And can you expound po based on your own experience, research on local birds? Salamat po.
Could you repeat that? Sorry.
Are there any ecological phenomena or processes that result from bird movement? In books and guides, we read of seed dispersal, etc. And can you expound po based on your own experience or research on local birds?
Okay. Hindi ako yung gumawa ng research, no. Since hindi ako biologist, hindi ko kayang gawin yung ganung research. Although we have observations in the field. Some of our members are part of the Institute of Biology in UP, and they made a study on frugivores of the Philippines. Frugivores meaning these are birds that eat fruits. And then yun, dun nila nakita yung relationship between the decline of forests, kung nawala ang mga frugivores, and yung role nila as a dispersal unit sa ng seeds. So merong ganung study. Yun. Siguro.
Okay. Next question. Concerning the quality of data with citizen science initiatives, what are mechanisms used to ensure accuracy of observations with details such as species ID or location tags?
Okay, that's a very good question. No? Pag in bird watching, pag nag-submit ka ng report, meron kang reviewer. Siyempre, wala kang reviewer kung wala kang organization na kinasasalihan. So in the case of the Wild Bird Club of the Philippines, we have reviewers for our reports. So there will be species na pag sinabi mo nakita mo, okay, sige, tanggap yan. But there will be species naman na pag sinabi mo nakita mo, you have to substantiate it. How do you substantiate it? You can either show photographs, show sketches. You can also describe it. You can also describe the behavior, the season, the habitat. Ang daming pwedeng ang daming pwedeng tingin sa iyo actually. In fact, meron akong report na it's a very common bird. Hindi siya dapat ma-question. However, in my report, I said 200 individuals, which was very unusual, parang unheard of. So, kinausap pa ako, pinadala ng email, can you substantiate this? Can you send me pictures? Ganun. So, yun, meron kang, kumbaga may clearinghouse para masabing para ma-ensure na yung data mo is reliable. Now, if you cannot substantiate it, or sabihin natin, okay, you saw an egret, but you cannot substantiate whether it's a Chinese egret or whatever species, then it can be relegated as in the family level lang, egret species, gano'n. Pero may mga times din talaga na sobrang unlikely na makita yung ibon, in which case na yung ganung report, yung ganung claim, hindi siya tinatanggap. So yun. In the case of Ebird, ganun din. So each country, kasi nga global siya, no? Each country will have its own set of reviewers. So may reviewer ka for species, may reviewer ka for the location, and gano'n. So may ganon. Kumbaga since it's a community community maintained resource, may may mga taong nagko-contribute doon ng time lapse review records. Yan. Next.
Okay, next question. We have many bird species in our village. Unfortunately, we don't know their names. How will we able to identify them while watching them from afar? Thank you.
Okay. Pinakamaganda niyan, sali kayo sa Birdwatch Philippines community sa FB. Doon sa group na yon, you can post about it. You can, if you have photographs, okay. If you don't have photographs, meron lang kayong description, okay din. May mga ganun, marami nagtatanong sa amin na, may nadinig po akong ganitong tunog. What could it be? And sometimes just a description lang nila, alam na namin kung ano siya. So either join the community or go check out our website, kasi yung website naman namin, we have galleries. We have a gallery of birds in the Philippines. Hindi siya kompleto, but yung common birds at least nandun. So you can also check that out.
Okay. Next question. May time frame po ba dapat, sir, para masabi na inhabited ng bird species ang isang location? And what causes the difference in bird population in a natural forest and a planted forest?
Time frame. Maganda tanong yun. Mahirap sagutin. Pero in terms of in terms of keeping a record of a sighting, as long as you were able to cite it, as long as you were able to see it, then that's a record. Irrelevant na kung doon ba siya nakatira or hindi, o dumaan lang. Importante lang nakita natin siya doon. Kasi pwedeng hindi mo na siya makita ulit somewhere else eh. At least the information is there na yes, that bird has been seen in this area. And that already is an important contribution to the records. Now, for you to determine naman, to be able to say na the bird is a resident of the area, then just observe how long you can see it. Kasi yung iba dyan, nagkakaroon ng migration, local migration. For a certain number of days, nandito siya. By next year, makikita mo uli siya dyan. Or pabalik-balik lang siya in two areas. Ganon. So, ang bottom line pa rin is at least nakita mo doon. If you see it, report it. Ganon. Only last, what causes the difference between, sorry?
Natural forest and planted forest po, bird population.
Well, I think alam ko yung pinupuntahan ng tanong mo. Kasi planted forest would normally be monoculture. For example, yung mga mahogany forest natin, like yung sa Bohol. Now, mahogany plantations is known for basically empty. It's empty. Wala siyang biodiversity. Ang sabes, pinapatay niya yung ibang species doon. So since monoculture siya, monocrop, you can only expect a certain number of species. I doubt kung magiging totally zero ka doon. Meron yan, may ibon dyan, pero hindi ganun karami. Hindi ganun karami ang species, ang diversity, hindi mataas. Pero if you have a natural forest, in a natural forest kasi, the vegetation is diverse. You have seed producing plants, you have fruit bearing plants, you have plants that are attractive to insects, ganon. If you have a variety of flora, iba-ibang characteristics, may flowers ka, may fruits ka, then you can expect a higher diversity of birds. Parang ganito lang kasimple yan eh. Actually, ano namin yan, pag may nagtatanong sa amin, meron akong garden, gusto kong mag-attract ng birds. Anong gagawin ko? Yun ang sagot namin. Mag-plant ka ng fruiting tsaka flowering trees or plants. Tapos maglagay ka ng calamansi. Specific yon. So, pag meron kang fruit-bearing plants, pupunta yung mga fruit eaters mo. Pag meron kang flowering plants, pupunta yung mga insects. Mga bees and other mga other nectar feeders. So you already have insects, you have nectar, you have fruits, and tatlong klaseng tatlong klaseng food source na yon para sa ibon. Meron kang nectar feeders, meron kang insect feeders, meron kang fruit feeders. And then ano yung calamansi? Yung calamansi, ideal siya for higat. Madalas mga itlog ng mga butterflies doon sa calamansi. Ang problema lang, higat. Pero importante yung higat kasi may mga ibon naman nakakain ng higat. So, nadagdagan ko ngayon madadagdagan ko ngayon isa pang klase ng organism. So, ganun lang siya. Mas diverse yung yung flora mo, mas diverse din yung fauna. Yeah.
Next question. How does migratory bird species affect the endemic species? And mahirap po bang magmapa ng birds ngayong pandemic? Salamat po.
Sagutin ko muna yung yung pangalawa.
Okay.
Mahirap bang magmapa? Hindi. Kasi importante yung data. Ang mahirap is yung pag-gather ng data. Pero if you have data already, the mapping itself is not that difficult. As long as, of course, you know how to map. No? You can access the Ebird database and do all sorts of analysis with the data. Pero if you're going to the field to gather data, then that's a different story. It's not recommended for now. Yon. Ano yung una? Sorry.
Ayun, how does migratory bird species affect the endemic species?
How does migratory species affect the endemic species? Initially, you would think na they would crowd out the endemic species, pero not necessarily, kasi most of the hindi naman most, a lot of the migratory species coexist with the endemics. And yung mga migratory birds natin na maramihan kung pumunta sa Pilipinas in the tens of thousands, you would normally find them in wetlands na ang kasabay lang naman nila yung mga ducks natin. So they would coexist. Hindi sila walang mag-edge out ng kung sino man. If somebody was edged out, that would have happened a long time ago during as part of the balance of nature thing.
Okay. Next question ay what can you advise to a student who wants to map birds but he or she is not familiar with GIS? And then another thing is magkakaroon po ba ng another session para magturo ng paggawa ng different types of maps on birds?
Okay. panibagong session para magturo kung paano gumawa ng mapa. If you know how to map, if you know how to use data for mapping, or if you know how to map using data, ito yung sinasabi ko lagi, lahat yun applicable sa birds. If you know how to use a certain mapping technique, it can be applied to birds. Ganun lang siya. So, ang importante lang doon, naiintindihan mo ba yung ginagawa mo with your data? If you're not familiar with the data, then doon tayo kakaproblema. Parang, okay, paano ko ba sabihin? I'm familiar with the techniques, no? Pero ang komportable akong imapa, normally, mga ganyan, birds or something else. Pero may mga ibang datasets na hindi ko imamapa kasi hindi ko alam kung tama ba na pakita siya ng ganito. Like for example, COVID. The techniques that I use in birds or some other in other development sector data can be used in COVID mapping. Pero hindi ko alam kung tama na i-present yung data as such kasi hindi ako yung expert doon. So, pero I can do that. Now, so dali natin sa usapang birds, how to map birds. At hindi ka naman kung hindi ka familiar sa birds or sa nature ng birds, then you can ask somebody who knows what's essential or what should be the tools that you're using for mapping, or how you should show a certain data set. Ganun. Now, kung hindi ka naman marunong sa GIS, of course, ang sagot doon is mano-mano. Pero hindi siya nakakatuwa. Well, kung hindi ka marunong mag-GIS, depende kung anong klaseng mapping ang gagawin mo. Tsaka gaano kalaki yung data. Kung konti lang naman, 10 lang yung data mo, or 50 at may tiyaga ka na mag-mano-mano, you can just do it on Google Earth maybe, manually inserting dots. But if you have tons of data na hindi na magiging parang hindi na tamang imano-mano, then you have to learn GIS. Yeah.
And then last few questions na lang po. So you've mentioned earlier that one of the challenges that you encountered was the quality of data that you presented or gathered. So that if the researcher or watcher put the exact coordinates and published it or made it in public, the poachers could possibly hunt it. Does that affect the quality of the data itself and the possibility of having ethical issues such as info dissemination? With that problem, what is your opinion or maybe suggestion to prevent that to happen? Thank you.
Okay, yes, malaking issue nga talaga siya, no? For the book Threatened Birds of the Philippines, what we decided on was to generalize or to dilute the coordinates to the municipal level. Meaning, hanggang munisipyo ka lang, hindi ka aabot ng barangay. Kasi once na alam mo na kung nasang barangay yung Philippine Eagle, madali mo na mahanap. Now, for example, if the resource gave exact coordinates, idadilute lang namin yun. So, ganun yung ginawa namin. Kasi nga, malaki yung risk na ng poaching. Now, on the data management side of things, ito yung ang proposal ko dapat ganito. Hindi dapat pagka initial reporting, it has to be as detailed as possible. Ang coordinates mo or ang location mo, as detailed as possible, so that you can use the data for localized studies. Pero kasi kunya sabihin, by localized studies, sabihin natin barangay level ang analysis mo or dalawang barangay, ganun lang. Hindi mas maliit sa munisipyo. If your data is municipal level or city level, then that means ang observation mo, pag minapa mo, nasa gitna ng city hall, nasa gitna ng city. And the center of the city may not necessarily be it's not necessarily the area where you saw the bird. Ideally, gusto mo siyang mangyari na pagka pinlot mo yung bird at yung vegetation, say for example, yung forest cover, at alam mo nasa forest mo siya nakita, magpapatong sila sa mapa. Pero kung diluted na yung coordinates mo, hindi mo na magagamit yun. Maglalayo yun. Hindi mo siya magagamit. So, ang sabi ko nga dati, ang pinakamaganda niyan, get the most detailed location you can get or report the location as detailed as you can. And then on the data management side, the detailed coordinates is not for public usage. For the public consumption version, i-dilute mo na yun. Now, if there's a researcher, for example, na gustong gumamit ng mas detailed na location information, then it has to be requested. Tapos may clearing, may review ng credentials ng tao, ganun. Yan. Ano yung rationale niya for asking for the data set in that detail. So may ganon. Kasi yung ang hihingin lang natin or ang i-compile natin ay diluted na location. It can only, pagka ganun ang ginawa natin, pag ganun ang practice natin, we can only do large city level, provincial level studies, or baka nga hindi pa natin magamit sa ganun sayang. Isipin niyo yun. For example, yung Metro Manila, yung Manila Bay na issue. You have the airport being constructed. Now, in any development project, you have to have an EIA, Environmental Impact Assessment. In the EIA, kailangan nandun yung listahan ng may listahan ka doon ng mga biodiversity na nakikita sa area. Now, if your data says that the birds are located in this coordinate na hindi naman pumapatong doon sa project boundaries, then walang issue. Ang problema, kalahati ng project mo critical bird area. So talo ka agad kung yun ang data natin. I hope malinaw yun.
Okay, last question. We would like to mention that we will only be entertaining one last question kasi we received a lot of questions and direct messages. So maybe you could just
send yun lang
email.
Sa akin.
Just send an email to Sir John. So mamaya provide natin yung email ni Sir John. So our last question is, how are bird species affected in terms of behavior, reproduction, and patterns when they have wars in a specific geographical location?
Good question. Depending on the war and depending on the scale of the war, kung malaki yan na mismo sabog, of course, madidisturb yung ibon. Ganong katindi bang disturbance ang kailangan para masabing na-stop mo na yung breeding ng ibon? Ito example, concrete example to na nakita ko first hand. Nasa Aurora kami noon. We were bird watching and we saw a pair of woodpeckers. gumagawa sila ng ng nest. At malapit lang siya sa highway. So nandun kami, nag-set up kami ng ng scope namin, and then pinanood namin. Yung iba may mga cameras na malalaki, nag-set up din sila ng mga camera nila, picture, bird watching, gano'n. And then after a few minutes, umalis na ako kasi ayoko ma-istorbo yung ibon. After 30 minutes, bumalik ako dun sa area, andun pa rin yung mga tao. Tapos yung iba lumalapit pa. And sige, titingnan ko kung ano nangyayari. Andun pa rin yung ibon. After a while, nawala. After more than 30 minutes, I think after 1 hour, naghihintay kami, hindi na bumalik. Inabandon yung nest. And that's because there were people right in front of the in front of them. We were a good 10 meters or more from the birds, pero iniwan nila. Wala naman kami ginagawa. Or at least tingin namin wala kami ginagawa. Pero yung mere presence namin doon, kahit tahimik kami, disturbance na yon. Now, kung meron kang wars, kung meron kang gulo, meron sumasabog, may naglalakad sa loob ng forest, disturbance yon. Alam mo na mangyayari. I think you would have an idea. Meron pa pala. I had a friend once na taga Mindanao, I think, UP Mindanao yata siya. Basta field biologist din. And then, nakwento niya sa akin, yung Maya, yung familiar ka sa Maya, no? Ang tawag na sa Maya, coke bird. Coke as in soft drinks. Now, ba't ko binabanggit ito? Kasi, normally, sinasabi namin, ito observation namin. Pag may nakikita, pag nasa bundok ka, makakita ka ng Maya. At habang nakakita ka ng Maya, ang makikita mong ibon is the regular species. But once na mawala yung Maya, makikita mo marami ng ibang ibon na unusual na or hindi mo nakilala. Now, ano yung coke? As long as makaka-access ka pa ng coke, kasi di ba sa bundok may mga nakatira, iba dyan may tindahan. As long as may coke pa, may Maya. As long as may Maya, konti ang ibon. Yun yung So, as long as may tao, basically ang point lang, as long as may tao, konti ang ibon.
Thank you everyone for your questions and comments. Your participation in this session is highly appreciated. So unfortunately, we cannot entertain all of them in this session. So again, you may want to send an email to Sir John. Sir John, ano po yung email na pwede nilang gamitin?
Ito UP na lang. Or pwede rin naman ayun yung i-compile na lang tapos
send ko sa inyo.
Oo.
Okay.
Tapos pwede mo i-disseminate sa kanila.
Okay po. Sige, ganun na lang po yung gawin natin. So kasi we received an influx of direct messages. So yan. So ayan. So thank you again, Sir John, for your wonderful talk. To show our appreciation, the Philippine Geographical Society would like to give a certificate to our speaker for sharing his valuable insights and expertise this afternoon. The certificate of appreciation is given to Jonathan Villasper for sharing his valuable insights and expertise as virtual resource speaker for the talk, Mapping Bird Ecology and Conservation, as part of the Philippine Geographical Society Lecture Series 2021 held on August 7, 2021, signed by Joseph Palis, PhD, Chair of the UP Department of Geography, and Emmanuel B. Garcia, ENP, President, Philippine Geographical Society.
Salamat.
With that, we are at the end of our program. I would like to call the convener of the PGS Lecture Series and chairperson of the Department of Geography, Dr. Joseph Palis, for the closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Doms. Thank you very much, John, especially for that wonderful talk. John and I started way back when we were in college. I'm a little bit older than him though, but we went to a conservation group and we spoke about this through the years. And it's so wonderful to see some of the questions being asked by the audience, which were pretty much what we talked about too. John being a much more serious bird watcher, enthusiast, and uh, um, conservationist much more than me. Um, Let me just make a few comments real quick. Not so much to add, but more on certain kinds of insights. But I think one of the things that John mentioned earlier when I was inviting him to be part of this was the robust data that we have right now in terms of mapping birds, right? So, and there's this one question earlier that really stuck with me. Uh, is the question of ethical consideration when you have much more data. And it leads to certain kinds of practices that may endanger the or further the extermination of certain birds, but in a way that is probably one of the dangers, right, of endeavors such as this. Also, citizen science as a um, viable pursuit, no, for people that I think, John, you were absolutely right when you say something about the as much as accurate description of sighting should be in there. And what I like about citizen science when it comes to bird watching is it's an alternative to the encyclopedia or what was the so-called scientific way of observing things, because these were observed by the people, and it verges a little bit on what John and I spoke about much earlier, the ethno-ornithology that intersects with folklore, with popular notions of how birds behave, and mythology, and popular imaginary. So I believe that citizen science is just as valid as the so-called scientific um, texts that have been written about birds. And for me, for someone who don't do as much GIS mapping, unlike my colleagues, that's one of my questions too, is the knowledge of GIS also necessary? As John has mentioned, it can help, but it should not be the only thing that can guide you to do or make you do your own bird watching and being an enthusiast. And finally, maybe the question of not really more as a reaction to what you said, John, about the coke bird. I remember asking John one question before when I used to describe with him to him the birds that I see in my neighborhood, and I would describe it in such detail, and then he would know it. And I said, how come you know it? He said, well, it comes from really reading a lot of materials related to birds. And I said, what about the common birds? And do we not mention them anymore? He said, it's necessary to put the common birds too, because it's an indication that there's still enough birds that are out there. So we shouldn't be only looking for exotic or other birds that we feel are more important than others. I think in the true aim of conservation, we should put all the information that we can get about this, about a bird, since it has captured the imagination of many of us. So thanks a lot, John, and wonderful to hear from you. And maybe in the future that can be a special topic we can invite you to do more of, from training to teaching to any other thing. Thank you very much once again from the Department of Geography and PGS.
Thank you, Dr. Palis. So also, thank you for your participation in the Philippine Geographical Society Lecture Series. Before we end this session, we have some few announcements.
Mark Amon Pangan is gonna speak next month, September 25. The tentative title has not been given yet, or the title has not been given yet, but will be part of the series that we have. Just to give you a sense about the PGS lecture series, for those of you watching or seeing this for the first time, it's meant to show the application of geography in a more day-to-day, everyday, more practice-based kinds of undertakings to show you that geography is not just academic. So, Gums.
And next, yeah, if you are interested in becoming a member of the PGS, the organization is open for membership. For more information, please go to the PGS website, www.phgeographicalsociety.org. Also, the PGS Lecture Series is an ongoing event, and so we would like to request for your feedback to help in the preparation and improvement of our future events. Please answer the short survey after this session. The link to the online survey will be posted in the Zoom chat box for your reference. To watch previous sessions of the PGS Lecture Series, please go to the YouTube channel of the UP Diliman Department of Geography. The recorded lecture for this session will also be posted in the same channel. Last but not the least, we are inviting everyone to this year's International Conference on Geographical Studies 2021, or ICGS 2021, with the theme Geographies of Care, Lives, Spatialities, Experiences, and Practices. ICGS 2021 will happen virtually this year on November 4 to 5. The call for papers will be posted in various social media accounts later tonight, so please stay tuned. And before we end this online meeting, we would like to request our participants for a group photo. Please turn on your video